everybody. I'm Amy Starrow. I'm the Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy here. And I wanted to thank you all for coming. First of all, I want to show of hands, who thinks rain makes things more cozy inside? So I think we're all set for a really cozy, interesting evening tonight. I wanted to thank Courtney Kirsten, who has put this whole thing together. She is a Fulbright student here in Latvia, and she's one of our most active participants. And she's also someone whose name you should remember, because I think she's going to be famous down the road. And you're going to say, I met her here in Latvia. You don't believe me, but I saw her do a production here in Latvia. So remember this night for that. I also wanted to thank Satori. They're a new partner for us, but we're so glad to be working with them. We recently did a project together with Jonathan Rauch, a human rights and gay rights activist, and Satori published a really outstanding interview with him. So we're really happy to be working together with Satori, and look forward to more collaboration in the future. Tonight, this evening, we'll have 3 parts. First, Courtney will talk about Kate Chopin's famous book, The Awakening, which is a really seminal work of feminism. And then local actors and Courtney will present some monologues based on that book and also in the style of Eve Ensler's The Vagina Monologues. And then finally, Dace Demoska, is that right? Demoska, I apologize, will lead an informal discussion about what we've seen. She comes to us she's a researcher at the University of Latvia and also got her PhD at the University of Berkeley. So I know we're in for a great evening, and thanks again, everybody, for coming.
Hi there, I'm Courtney Kirsten, and Amy Starrow did a nice introduction. I'm a Fulbright Fellow. I'm originally from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and I just graduated in May from the University of Evansville in Evansville, Indiana. And I've been here in Riga since September researching theater and directing techniques, primarily at Jaunais Rigas Teatris, and then I'm also a lecturer at the Latvian Academy of Culture. And I also have to give some thanks as well. I want to thank the Embassy and Amy, Christine, and Lauma for helping so much with this project, and then also to Satori, and also to all of you for coming tonight. I'm really excited about this project. And this project was originally inspired by Women's History Month and thinking about all of the things that encompass women and what it means to be a woman in the 21st century, but then also what is it meant to be a woman throughout time. And as I was thinking about this, one of the books that I read in high school that was one of the first texts that I thought, oh, feminism, women. What does this mean? And really started thinking about it was Kate Chopin's The Awakening. And I'm not the first person to have thought this about The Awakening. As Amy said, it's a seminal work of feminist literature. And she was one of the first women to really talk about, or not to talk about, but to write a character that is a strong, independent woman. And it's very interesting to see how this book was received at the time, and then how feminism and how women and women writers have changed throughout time. So, first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about Kate Chopin and her biography. She was born Catherine O'Flaherty in 1850. She was one of 5 children, but both of her sisters died in infancy, and then both of her brothers died when they were in their 20s. So she spent most of her life as an only child. When she was 5, she was sent to a Catholic boarding school where she studied French and English. And she'd only been there a short time, but then her father died in a train accident, and she was sent back home to live with her widowed mother, her widowed grandmother, and her widowed great-grandmother. And so then after a period of time, she was sent back to the boarding school where she was surrounded by nuns, and she graduated with degrees in English and in French. So this might not seem that, relevant to just someone's life, but particularly for Kate Chopin, it is something that's very specific when looking at her writing, because she grew up surrounded by strong, independent, intellectual women, whether she was at home surrounded by her mother, her grandmother, or her great-grandmother, who were all widowed, or she was surrounded by the nuns at school. So looking at her later writings, it's pretty easy to see where it was that she sort of thought up this archetype of a strong, independent woman. It's also worth noting that because she didn't grow up with a prominent male figure in her life, in much of her writings, there's not a lot of those prominent male figures. And she also wasn't subject to the role of the submissive wife and mother that most Victorian marriages were composed of. Then in 1870, when she was 20, Kate married Oscar Chapin, and she did what most women of the time did. She got married and she had lots of children. So by the time she was 29, she had 6 children, which was very typical for women at the time. But at the same time, Kate Chapin was also very untypical because she would often sort of escape from her role as a wife and a mother, and she would smoke cigarettes and she would walk around New Orleans and was sort of, in many ways, she was gossiped about because she, in some ways, besides being a wife and a mother, was kind of the antithesis of what a woman would be like during that time. She very freely expressed her opinions and took very, very strong views on certain things, and was also very controversial in her views. So she was known around town as sort of this woman that not only was a wife and a mother, but then also had this other side to her life where she would go around and walk around the town and sort of spout her ideas. Then, after 9 years of marriage to Oscar, which, according to literary scholars, while she was slightly atypical in the way that she engaged with society in terms of being a little bit more independent, Oscar was very supportive of this. And he was said that he really loved Kate's sense of independence, and he loved the fact that she was sort of a free spirit. So they lived very happily together for 9 years. And then Oscar's businesses failed, and so they moved to Clouterville. I might be saying that wrong. It's in northern Louisiana, so we'll just say northern Louisiana. And so they moved there. So Oscar ran a few plantations, and then he also opened up a general store. And while it was sort of a financially difficult time because they had to move away from New Orleans to a different, more rural part of the state, for Kate, it was also a really important time in regards to her as a writer, because it was there that she was exposed to the Louisiana Creole people and really indulged in their culture and learned more about what it meant to be a Louisiana Creole person and really took part in that culture. And just as when she was in New Orleans, Kate did not prescribe to the typical activities of women during that time. Instead of doing her household chores, she would stroll around on horseback out in the streets. And just as in New Orleans, she was kind of the talk of the town, and there's a lot of gossip about her because she often put aside her household duties to go do more independent, free-spirited things. Then, in 1882, Oscar died, and he left Kate in $12,000 worth of debt, which today would be about $300,000. And so for a short while, Kate tried to keep running the plantations, and she tried to keep running the general store. But it was also rumored that right after Oscar died, she had an affair with a farmer. And so meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Kate's mother is saying to her, "Kate, come to St. Louis," which is where her mother was. "Here you can be with me. You don't have to worry about any of your finances. Come here with me and everything will be better." So it's a little bit debated among literary scholars whether Kate Chapin went to St. Louis purely because of financial reasons, or if she went there because she'd been having an affair with a man and it didn't turn out that well, and so she needed to get out of town. It could be both. But regardless of the reasons, then she moved to St. Louis. And then she'd only been in St. Louis about a year and a half, and then her mother died. And so within the span of about 2 years, her husband died, and then her mother died. And Kate sank into a really deep depression. And so one of their friends, who was also a doctor, a family friend, said, "Kate, maybe you should take up writing. Writing would be a way for you to express your opinions that you've always been so vehement about. It would be a way to express these things and not get people so riled up. It would be something that would maybe be a little bit therapeutic for you, and maybe you could make some money." And so Kate said, "Sure, I'll write some books." And it turned out, that Kate Chapin was quite the popular writer. She had many publications. Mostly she wrote short stories, but they appeared in the popular literary magazines of the time. She mainly wrote stories about the Creole and Cajun people that she'd gotten to know during her stay in northern Louisiana. Her stories were about women, love, independence, passion, and freedom, and they were, again, based on the people that she'd met during her time in Louisiana. And in particular, Kate Chapin, with her short stories, was very successful because she talked about these sort of taboo topics of women and love and passion, but because she was specifically talking about the Creole and Cajun people of northern Louisiana, it was okay, because it was kind of like a documentary. She wasn't putting her opinion out there about these people. She was merely documenting the idiosyncrasies of a small culture. And so for this, people were able to sort of indulge in this without seeing it as a universality of human nature. She then decided to take her hand to writing novels, and she wrote 2 novels, the second of which was The Awakening, which was published at the height of her writing career in 1899. Ironically, this book is considered now to be a classic, but it also marked the end of her writing career. As I said earlier, many of her early works had been accepted despite their controversial subject matter because Kate Chopin, as a writer, didn't take a stance as to the story or to the women that she was talking about. She merely presented these things as in sort of a documentary style. But with The Awakening, Kate took a different approach and had a very sympathetic attitude towards the protagonist. At this time, the feminist movement was just beginning to emerge in other parts of America, but it was almost entirely absent in the very conservative state of Louisiana. At that time, under Louisiana law, a woman was still considered to be the property of her husband. And so Kate Chopin wrote this novel, and the main character, Edna, who we'll talk about a little bit later, was very shocking to the public. And even more shocking was the fact that Kate Chopin, the author, took a sympathetic view towards this woman. In the book, just a quick recap, a little teaser before we talk about it a little bit more, Edna willingly leaves her womanly duties as a wife and a mother in favor of discovering her independence and her sexuality. The Awakening was highly criticized because, at the time, it was very scandalous content. The novel was particularly scorned because it very openly discussed the emotional and sexual needs of a woman, which previously had never really been acknowledged in literature and wasn't acknowledged in culture at the time. During the time, society placed a particular emphasis on the sexual purity of a woman and as their identity as being a wife and a mother. The Awakening, rebels against these ideas. And Kate, after having this really successful literary career and getting published a lot, was very discouraged by the fact that no one really seemed to like her novel. And not only did they not like it, but they were very critical of what she had written. And so after that, she backed off and she said, "I'm not writing novels anymore." And she only wrote 3 more stories before she died of a brain hemorrhage in 1904 at the age of 52. So then The Awakening went out of print for about 50 years before it was rediscovered. And when it was rediscovered in a different time and in a different light. And so the novel and this character of Edna and her sexual and emotional awakenings were really embraced by people. So it's now considered to be a classic. As I said before, I read this in high school, and it was probably the first thing that I'd read that I really sort of started thinking about feminism, what it means to be a woman. And I know, talking with a lot of my friends, I said The Awakening, they're like, "Oh yeah, I read that in high school or in college." So today, it might not seem like such a scandalous thing, but for the time, for Kate Chopin to write this novel, it was such a big step in terms of feminist thought. So now talking a little bit more about this novel. In the novel, Kate tells the story of Edna Pontellier, who has come with her husband and 2 children to vacation for the summer at Grand Isle in Louisiana. And it's there that Edna discovers how frustrated she's been with her identity solely as a wife and a mother, and she begins during that summer to search for a new identity. During the course of the summer, she befriends 2 women, the first of which is Mademoiselle Reitz, who's an artist. She moves out of her husband's house. She develops romantic relationships with other men, and from these experiences of meeting other men and feeling romantic feelings for them, she realizes what's been missing in her current marriage. She discovers her artistic side, and so throughout the course of this novel, there's all these artistic and sexual and emotional awakenings that are happening for Edna. But then, at the end of the book, Edna chooses to walk into the Gulf of Mexico, swim, drowns, and then dies. So, at the end of the novel, after discovering all of these things about herself and about her place in the world, she commits suicide. So, I'm sure you can probably, from that, tell a little bit about what Kate Chopin's, why this was so scandalous. And not only was she telling the story about this woman that did that, but she had a very sympathetic view towards this woman that discovered all these things about herself, discovered all these things about her society, and then kills herself in the end.